So I'll wait just a few more seconds and then we'll get started.
Yes, and
I'm good to go.
Firstly, what the fuck is thousands of years history of the expedition, stories of legend exist long before that
My lips always look really good in videos like this where the lighting is darker and it's like my lips really pop. I love it. They look really plump. I don't know why, but in like specific lighting, they look especially like pouty. I love it. I'm so fucking vain.
Just kidding.
Okay, if we could get started, I'm sure everyone can hear me, yes?
Yes.
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 Okay,
Yes.
great, thanks. So thank you all for being here. We have 21 people now out of the 30. I'm sure people will hopefully come into the session soon. And I was just wondering, did you need to type in the password or just simply click on the link in order to enter the Zoom meeting?
Click on the link.
Good. Yeah. Zoom has now, I guess, embedded the password into the link because people are doing Zoom bombing now, as you probably all heard about, a new word that has come up in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so I'm glad that that's what you need to do. So let's talk a little bit about tonight. What I'd like to share with you is I'd like to do a little bit of history of public health in San Francisco, and to talk about public health very broadly. This is something that really is not in your book, so this is a supplement in many ways. It's in your book and fits and starts, but it's certainly not in the textbook in any substantive and systematic way. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of public health in San Francisco. I also think it is very, very relevant, particularly given what we're living through right now, this pandemic that is that's impacting us. And so I thought it was just simply a good thing to do. And it's, as you know, it's an interest of mine. And this is a long-term project of mine, but I'm planning on writing, and I've done a certain amount of writing in terms of a book manuscript on the history of public health and in San Francisco. And now it looks like, unfortunately, I'll be able to take on yet another pandemic called the COVID-19 pandemic. So I will do that. But I wanted to go ahead and give this lecture. I don't want to make it a long lecture. I want to make it about 40 minutes or so. And then I would like to really get work, believe it or not, it is April 15th. And so the semester is kind of rounding out to coming, toward the end. We're at least 75, 80% through. And so I wanted to check specifically about how the group projects are doing and an idea that I had about how the group projects would be given. And then I wanted to, also say that I have to supplement, to kind of fill in the time, because I really do want to make sure you get as good of an education as possible. I wanted to make sure that you read a couple of very, very brief articles. I have placed them on Canvas. I don't know if any of you have seen them yet. but they're two very brief articles. And I have a very brief writing assignment that I am giving that essentially ask you to read these two articles and then write basically 300 to 300 words on three specific topics that are related to the articles. And so then those will be that writing assignment. I've decided to make it due, just to give you some flexibility, to make it due on April 18th, which is Saturday, by 11:59 p.m. And so, it's there. It shouldn't take you that long. The articles should take you maybe 20 minutes total to read both of them. And I would imagine another 40 minutes or so to maybe prepare a little 300 brief response to three questions I had about the article. And then you would submit that via Canvas like you did the last time. Okay. Let me also say that last time there were only a total of 24 out of the 30 students submitted that assignment. And what I've decided to do in order to kind of make this work out is that I decided to basically, I'm going to make the course worth 100 points. And so writing these papers can really be very helpful because it adds up towards the 100 points. But what I want to do is like the exam was worth 40 points. So already we're at 50 points, I think 55 with this little writing assignment. And then I'll go ahead and recalibrate either your group project or your term paper into a certain amount of points. And so the total course will be worth 100 points. And then what I will do is make a very liberal curve because I really want to account for the fact that we've had a very tough time this semester with all the stuff going on. And I want to give people more the benefit of the doubt than to come down hard on them. And so, but I do expect you to do your work. And I say that in a loving and very respectful way. I really want to make sure that this is a decent and academic and educational experience for you. So I just ask that you hang in there with me and that you do these various things and things will work out. We can talk individually or over email if you have specific questions, but that's essentially what I plan on doing is making the course worth 100 points. And then I will look at the total points that everyone gets and then do a liberal curve to make sure that people are given the benefit of the doubt. So I hope this sounds good to you. I also, after this lecture, I want to talk to you about an idea that I have about the group projects, and I really need to get your feedback about that. And we'll go ahead and we'll do that after the lecture. So let me give the lecture. Let me then go ahead and check in with you about either the group project or your term papers. And then I want to you'll then go on to Canvas and read the other two, the brief articles, and then do your brief writing assignment either tonight or you have 4 days to do that. I just wanted to make sure that you had enough time. I know last time was a bit rushed, but I wanted to kind of stretch it out a little bit. So are there any questions at this point? I think it could be between 30 and 40 minutes. And I wanted to discuss with you later, Nestor, but I mean, why not just kind of get this squared away now? There are a couple of choices here. One is that I have a preference, but behind door number one is the idea that you would present your presentation much like I've been giving these lectures. Basically do a share screen and take us through your presentations and do it that way. That would be one way of doing it. And that would be my preferred way of doing it if it's technologically easy enough. And what I mean by that is that I'm hosting these Zoom meetings. If I'm hosting these Zoom meetings, are you all as groups able to share your screens with? Yeah. Okay, so my preference would be that you end up that each group goes ahead and actually does a presentation again, much like the way I'm doing these lectures, and that way the class, that's the whole point of it, is that it enriches the class more. That was my first idea. The second idea that I would least prefer is that you simply send the presentations to me and that I grade it. But I think that just isn't in the spirit of when I assigned the group projects, because I really wanted the entire class to get the benefit of your good work. So I'd really like us to try to do the first one, which is that you're to do your presentations. We'll figure out a way of sharing the screen. Maybe I can give everyone permission to do that. And then each group can download their screen. But the other thing I want to share with you is, to be very honest, and I say this again in a loving and a respectful way, is I hardly heard from anyone after I asked all of you to write to me to let me know how things were going in terms of, is the group project still progressing? Who's in your group, and what is your group? Just so I have a sense of who's still involved and what's going on, so I know what to expect as we move through these weeks. And that way I can also schedule these presentations as well. So I am going to ask, would you kindly please email me, each group captain or somebody, get together and decide who's going to email me. And I need the information that I asked you for through both of those emails, one last week and one just today. And that is the title of your group project and who's in your group, and just to make sure that things are going okay. I'm very happy to have phone consults, next week, because next week I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to either work on their term paper or continue with their group project, to use next week's class to be able to do that. As indicated in your syllabus, it says on April 22nd to be arranged, and that's what I had in mind. So I'm really going to need to know what's going on with the group projects and an accounting of what's going on. In other words, who's in your group, what is your group, what's the title of your presentation, and how things are going more or less, and any kind of help that you would need from me so I can give you a hand. And if we need to talk next Wednesday night, I will avail myself to all of you. And so you can email me again and I'll call you right back and we'll have a conversation. So I want to make sure that you know that that's available for next week. Sound clear? Great. Okay, let's continue.
Wait, is there, are we still going to stick to the timeline that's on the syllabus in terms of presentations, in terms of actually presenting the projects?
What I think that I will probably do, particularly given the fact that we only have, I believe, 6 groups. I believe that was right, about 6 or 7 groups. And if we keep each of those to a half hour, 40 minutes, what I would be able to do is to kind of push them back a week. And so what I would propose is that we actually do the presentations on May 6th and May 11th. Does that seem acceptable?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Well, I have a question. What's the consensus in terms of the number of captains who have responded, as well as the individuals who have responded in terms of your update on their term paper or group projects?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And let me just say that it was, I don't want to get into any shame, blame, but I need to say that I was a bit annoyed and concerned because probably only about really 2 to 3 people got back in touch with me.
Understood.
Yeah. So I would just ask that everyone do that. I would ask that you, if you could do that, please, within the next couple of days, that would be really helpful for my planning, because I really need to get an accounting of who's still, because I'm not physically with you, I'm not even sure who's still around, what's happening. And I just want to get a pretty good sense, and having your help to do that would be really, really helpful. So that would be really great. So if I could ask you to please get that to me by Friday, that would be really good. And if I can ask a further indulgence, if all of you, no matter if you've responded to me or not, just resend the email to me if you have responded to me with answering those questions, because I want to kind of put those together in the next 48 hours or so. So even if you have emailed me, if you could forward me your email, just forward it to me so I have them all in a clump within the next 2 days, that would be super helpful. And then I will write an email to you over the weekend by the latest, saying, confirming that next week, next Wednesday, will be an evening when you can devote to either your term paper for 5 of you who decided to do that, or your group projects to kind of ready yourself to do that. Because frankly, I would want to let the groups know who's going on May 6th and who's going on May 11th. Okay, that would be really super helpful. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's get rolling here. I don't want to take too much of your time, although we do have time, which is a good thing. So let's talk about let's talk about public health. This is a critical topic today. A lot of people have not been nearly as aware of public health, unfortunately, until this current situation, where public health has been at the forefront of our minds in terms of really a system that has been in place to help literally with the public's health, in terms of helping to control, mitigate, and solve the problems when health issues really do confront the public or the communities across either the globe or the country or the state or wherever. One of the things that you should know is that over the last 2 or so generations, public health has been somewhat defunded in the United States. And it's a very, very important area of our humanity in terms of really being able to help us. I mean, I think that you all would agree that, particularly given this latest pandemic, COVID-19, which is very, very scary, that we've really looked to public health professionals to really help develop a framework to help us get through this. And I'm very proud of public health and its ability to do that. And I know the public face of public health right now is Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been famous for many, many years at the National Institutes of Health for over nearly 4 decades, actually, about 4 decades now. What I thought I would do this evening is to really talk about public health in the context of San Francisco and even in the larger California. So let's kind of go through this a little bit. The first thing I want to share with you is that public health is a very, very broad topic. So when we talk about domestic violence, that's a public health issue. When we talk about institutionalized racism, that's a public health issue. When we talk about the flu, that's a public health issue. When we talk about environmental racism, that's a public health issue. Public health really spans a number of different areas. And so even when we go back, as the first slide shows, that very familiar slide of Yerba Buena, San Francisco, 1846 to 1847, that there were very interesting public health issues even back during that time, whether it was violence, whether it was cholera, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or later, about 40, 42, 43 years after, around 1900, there was a bubonic plague in San Francisco, as I shared with you before. But public health goes way, way back. And institutionally, it really has not been a really, really big deal until the 18th and into the 19th century. So it is relatively new, particularly when we're talking about a broad, long history of either this country or other countries. So it is that. So the first thing we know really is that it really begins with the Native Americans and with the lack of immunity to European diseases. We know that the majority of the Native population perished from diseases such as typhoid fever, tuberculosis, smallpox, diphtheria, and a number of other diseases as a result of lacking immunity to European diseases. And as we know, San Francisco was a small frontier town named Yerba Buena that only had really between 200 and 350 people before the gold rush of 1848. You know that. That's a statistic that I had shared with you before. And it rose very, very quickly to 20,000 inhabitants in the early 1850s. Because the population sprang up so quickly and immediately, we did not have in San Francisco, or in other cities for that matter, in their initial kind of growth, the infrastructure to be able to handle that many people. So the infrastructure was strained, and frankly, it was insufficient. So you have on the slide now, here's from the newspaper, the San Francisco Register, but there was, in fact, a cholera outbreak. And cholera has a very long history, and essentially what it is a bacterial infection that comes from the water. And so it was water, unclean water, that had bacteria that ended up creating public health issues, particularly the point where one's stomach was so sick that they would be vomiting and having basically a lot of diarrhea, and many people simply died of dehydration. That was a public health problem because the water was not clean, you know? And so, and as a matter of fact, a physician in San Francisco back in 1849 said that from his medical view, San Francisco was not the most desirable locality for a large commercial city, given how packed that it could be with its density, and particularly lacking an infrastructure to be able to help with public health. Another writer described public health in San Francisco as being a pretty sad state of affairs, where the streets were bottomless and the rats were fat and daring. Drainage and sewage were, as he said, quite poor. Dysentery was in epidemic proportions, and the odor of the city could be hardly imagined. And this was back in the time, even before germ theory, where there was something called miasma. And I want to spell that for you. It's M-I-A-S-M-A, miasma. And miasma is simply a bad, foul smell. And before germ theory really got rolling and institutionalized, it was thought that bad odors actually caused disease because they didn't quite understand the transmission of disease and the whole idea of germ theory. So that's actually pretty interesting. But the other thing that we know is that there was, besides the cholera, and I want to bring in slides that you've already seen to kind of contextualize them even better. but that we have the Sydney Ducks. And as you know, the Sydney Ducks actually created fires and mass violence in San Francisco. And I think we can say comfortably this was a public health problem. Again, if we're viewing public health broadly defined, it was in fact a public health problem. And it was dealt with, as you know, as with the Vigilante Committee of 1851. They took law into their own hands, particularly Sam Brannan's group. And there you have it. But again, it was a public health issue. And here we have the first Vigilance Committee of 1851 trying to stop that kind of violence, which in a sense, could you say that the Vigilance Committee was a public health committee? Yeah, kind of, but not really. I mean, certainly what they wanted to do is to stop the violence, which in fact would have improved the public health. But it was problematic in some ways because of the violence that actually occurred as a result of the Vigilance Committee doing their work. You know, they hanged several people in Portsmouth Square. Again, foreign miners tax, just an example of racism. Racism is a public health problem. It was rampant in the 19th century and still in the 20th century, and we still have a problem structurally with racism today. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Just to let you know, and many of you know from the news accounts today, just to bring you up to speed, that a lot of public health analysts, and we call them, these particular people, social epidemiologists, actually look at the discrepancies and even the, inequities in disease production. And the whole issue now that particularly people of color, brown and black people, are suffering from COVID-19 at a higher rate and more prominently than others in the society. And that's a structural problem that needs to be addressed. And that's been a problem forever and a day that needs to be addressed. But racism, no doubt, is in fact a public health issue. Again, this takes us back to something we already know about, the Cubic Air Ordinance. Again, this is 1870. This was basically racism and trumped up public health, using public health in a very bad and nefarious way to try to really harass and treat Chinese individuals in a very bad way. And so, again, this is using public health in a very false way in order to essentially harass and mistreat people based on their ethnic background. And so, again, public health has not always been, in fact, the shining star in the show. Let me put it to you that way. I think even back in 1870, public health officials in San Francisco should not have gone along with using the Cubic Air Ordinance, for example, knowing damn well that it was, in fact, a very racist attempt at harassing Chinese individuals. So I think that and the whole community. So that's one thing. But really, there was a lot of prejudice of the Chinese in Chinatown. There were ideas, nasty comments that the Chinese were not, in fact, sanitary. That they had these commercial establishments that were highly scrutinized, not only laundries, but food establishments, gambling establishments, etc., all highly scrutinized. And again, it's summed up by way of the Cubic Air Ordinance in many ways about how that was carried out. There was, even by 1875, San Francisco was in a recession. And there was something called the Workingmen's Party of California that blamed unemployment on the Chinese because it was thought that they were taking jobs away from white folks. And again, I just have to keep repeating. I sound like a broken record, but I'm happy to sound like a broken record because this point needs to be made over and over again, that kind of racism has a very deleterious or very negative effect on the people who are targets of that racism. So, Chinese were earning clearly a reputation for being more diligent workers compared to their white counterparts. There was xenophobia, a word, fear of foreigners that came into this whole thing. And there are a number of now books and articles written about this topic. And one good book to consult if you wanted to, and I know I'm being a little geekish right now, but Ronald Takaki's book, he's a former historian at UC Berkeley, he wrote a book called Strangers from a Different Shore. And Strangers from a Different Shore really highlight the kind of treatment that was doled out to those literally originally from a different shore. So we know about the public health issue. We know about the various aspects that are going on. When you have signs like this, this gets internalized. This creates stress. This creates chronic health problems in the community. This is not fun. This is not just harassment that goes away and people read the sign and it goes away. People internalize these kinds of things. And we know for sure these days that, in fact, it causes ill health in communities. Speaking of the Chinese, we're looking at a hospital, the Chinese hospital in San Francisco, that actually was very important to the Chinese community because Chinese were not even allowed to go to San Francisco General Hospital for a time because of the racism. And so the Chinese developed their own medical clinics in Chinatown. I believe this one was on Jackson Street in San Francisco, the Chinese hospital that actually served the Chinese population. And again, forced to serve the Chinese population because and I should mention this, the Public Health Hospital of San Francisco, that is General Hospital of San Francisco on Potrero, would not serve these the Chinese residents of San Francisco. So there's an entrance to Chinatown, very interesting. And again, just the kind of micro and macro aggressions that we see. I'm by no means a historian of architecture, but I can tell you that when we look at this street, which is, by the way, I believe it's Grant Street. It's the Grant Street entrance to Chinatown. That this is really not, in fact, an authentic Chinese architecture. It's essentially a white person's imagination of a Chinese architecture. And one of the things that I don't think I've ever told you in our lectures is the fact that when Chinatown burned down in the 1906 earthquake, the supervisors in San Francisco used that as an opportunity to try to get the Chinese out of that area because the supervisors, the white supervisors, essentially saw this as a prime piece of real estate that they could co-opt for other purposes and actually move the Chinese. The proposal was to move the Chinese out near the Bayview Hunters Point at the time. And there were a couple of very shrewd and luckily very politically savvy Chinese Americans who actually appealed to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and said, look, there's a lot of commerce to be made through Chinatown. And so they essentially talked the white supervisors into letting Chinatown be where it was, the oldest and largest Chinatown in the United States. And what they would do was to build it up. And so the tourism would be very much present in Chinatown. And so that was exactly the case. And as you know, Chinatown to this very day was and is in fact very much of a tourist attraction in San Francisco. But basically, what the two Chinese individuals had to do was to really make the case. And so this is basically somehow somebody's kind of a white imagination of what Chinatown should really look like. As anyone who knows anything about Chinese architecture knows that this doesn't quite fit in. And I'm, again, not enough of an expert on architectural history to be able to tell you, but that's basically what it is it's basically kind of a whitewashed Chinatown entrance and is not faithful to Chinese architecture. In fact, some people say that it actually has more of a Japanese motif to it rather than Chinese. Again, I don't know enough about that architectural history or architecture in order to be able to tell you that, but that's what I've read, and certainly that's what I have heard. So again, why is this in this lecture? Because it was highly stressful to the Chinese who had used this part of San Francisco as their cultural center to then be literally threatened to be kicked out after the earthquake. Luckily, that did not happen, and Chinatown flourished. And again, to this very day, I think you all would agree that it's a very, very culturally rich area of San Francisco, and very proudly the oldest and largest Chinatown in the United States, and also that, in fact, tourists love to come and visit San Francisco's Chinatown. So that is interesting. But the stress that was put on the Chinese after the San Francisco earthquake and before it, all throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, has really been problematic. Well, this is going to be the subject of your little brief written responses. Marilyn Chase has written this beautiful book called The Barbary Plague. And there was, as I shared with you, a bubonic plague in San Francisco in 1900. It came from infected fleas on rats. And in March of 1900, to be specific, a Chinese man was found dead in the basement of a hotel. An autopsy was revealed that the man had the plague. Again, this became another opportunity for primarily white people in San Francisco to blame the Chinese yet again for a public health problem. And so this became, without a shadow of a doubt, a racialized issue. And so this actually sparked a political fight. I mean, some white San Franciscans believed, believe it or not, that this was a Chinese disease and that white people couldn't catch it. Well, guess what? They were disabused of that very quickly, because a number of white folks ended up getting the plague as well. That, like this current COVID-19, it knows no boundaries, it knows no racial profiles, it knows none of that, that it is an equal opportunity epidemic. And in fact, it was. But what this did is, interestingly enough, and you'll read about this more in the two little articles that I've assigned for you to read, that this in fact sparked a political fight between medical professionals and politicians and business owners. Does this ring a bell, ladies and gentlemen? I think we know what's going on the national level right now.
Absolutely.
Where you can actually see how, in fact, politics is entering the arena, and that there is a huge tension between medical professionals and politicians and even business owners. So, for example, the governor of California, a guy by the name of Henry Gage, who you will read about in one of your articles, was determined to prove that the plague did not exist in San Francisco. He was absolutely determined. Why? First of all, he did not want to call negative attention to San Francisco because this would create a problem with tourism and other aspects of the city. But the first wave of this plague lasted from 1900 to 1904. 118 people ended up dying of the plague. They've confirmed cases. And they thought that they had this completely squared away, that the public health people ended up, and I think you've seen this plague, this slide from a previous lecture. But basically, they really wanted to put the plan on rats because they know rats and rodents had the fleas on them that created the plague, right? So what ends up happening is that around 1904, they thought that they had the plague completely eradicated. And from 1904 until late April of 1906, they thought, they had this thing squared away. And then they realized that when San Francisco rocked and rolled on April 18th of 1906, when the major earthquake happened, this woke up a lot of rats that started coming out of the sewers and everything else. And lo and behold, they thought the plague was gone, but guess what? It came back. And so from April 18th, 1906, from that earthquake, we know that sewers broke. We know that trash storage was stored haphazardly, which created a feeding frenzy for the rats. And we know that in May of 1907, we end up with our first new case of the plague. And after that, we found out that there were about 167 cases, and 89 people ended up dying. And so they had these rat abatement stages. So there was still, though, a lot of scapegoating the Chinese. And in fact, Henry Gage, who was then the governor of California during this period, also engaged in that kind of, when he could no longer deny the fact that indeed there was a plague. I mean, he just couldn't deny it any longer. He also joined in the chorus of other people who were very quick to point the fingers at the Chinese for causing this public health problem. Really was highly problematic. You should also know that tuberculosis was an issue and was compounded by the lack of education and literacy in San Francisco. And then many of you have heard about the Spanish flu, the flu epidemic that happened in 1918, 1919. What we know is by October of 1918, a man traveling from Chicago back home to San Francisco had the flu. And later that month, there were 169 cases, which then jumped to 2,000 cases. And the epidemic in San Francisco started in a huge way. And so, again, reminiscent of what's been going on over the last couple of months in our very own area, people were to avoid streetcars during rush hour. There was no dancing in public spaces. One had to avoid crowds. Does any of this sound familiar? There was a closure order by the mayor, Jim Rolfe, and health officials. Does this sound at all familiar? So the face mask was used by not only medical professionals, but also bankers, barbers, bank tellers, and others serving the public. They all needed to wear masks. San Francisco ended up strengthening its public health department in terms of it really making very permanently a public health committee that consisted of 8 members, and it goes on and on and on. We know that San Francisco had, for example, a General Hospital. This was founded during the year that the Civil War ended in 1865, and its current location on Potrero Street in San Francisco. Again, it would not serve all of San Francisco residents. It certainly denied the Chinese. There was lots of prejudice against essentially brown and black people during that period of time. But that's General Hospital. So we have a number of things going on. Here's another. Here's that same picture. Again, Chinatown, a dispensary or Chinese hospital. Here's a picture is 1899. It's a slightly different view of the other picture. Here's a slide that talked about how 50,000 San Franciscans contracted the flu in 1918 and 1919, and about 3,500 people ended up dying. Only one nursing student died, but that's a pretty serious event in San Francisco. And good old Merv Silverman in San Francisco, he was the director of the San Francisco Department of Public Health from 1977 to 1985. And I mention this to you because San Francisco had yet another epidemic. Of course, it wasn't just San Francisco's, but San Francisco certainly suffered, I would actually say, disproportionately in many ways. But now we're talking about the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so San Francisco had that epidemic where a lot of individuals, as many of you know, ended up dying, HIV positive and dying ultimately. Some people are still living with the disease because there's medications now that people are on regimens of medications. But this was a really big deal in San Francisco. And this was was not just a public health problem in terms of a virus running rampant called HIV, but also I would like us to note the kind of homophobia and sexual prejudice that occurred as a result of this as well. Many people argued that from the late 1960s that there was a gay movement that was actually creating a situation nationally whereby gay and lesbian and bisexual people, but primarily gay and lesbians, were gaining more social acceptance due to the gay and lesbian movement and courses being taught at universities on the topic, politicians, openly gay politicians. I'm thinking, for example, of Harvey Milk in San Francisco. I'm thinking about, other individuals who really were helping to create a situation in which there was less homophobia. There was the first gay pride parade in 1970 in San Francisco. And so gay and lesbian rights was really on the up and up and coming through. And then you have this horrible epidemic that occurred called AIDS, which not only devastated our population and really hit particularly gay and bisexual men particularly hard. Although, again, it's not a disease that knows one sexual orientation from the other, but it happened to hit that community pretty hard. But also think about what that did in terms of stigma and prejudice and discrimination against groups of people. So many people have argued and written about the fact that the gay and lesbian movement took several steps back when HIV/AIDS appeared on the scene, and it created a backslide of the progress that was made by activists and others who fought very valiantly to, have gay and lesbian, bisexual, queer people recognized and treated like human beings. And that took a hit when HIV/AIDS came. And San Francisco was one of the epicenters. And so San Francisco, I would say, suffered disproportionately. San Francisco was hugely in the news during that period of time. They closed a lot of bathhouses down. There was a lot of fear around HIV/AIDS. It was a real huge and serious problem. But again, it was something that San Francisco stepped up and tried to handle. So, I mean, what is this to say? That San Francisco played its role in various plagues and epidemics throughout history. And what I'm particularly interested in is the way in which people were treated during these epidemics. And I don't know if that makes sense, but what I have in mind is to do a book. It's kind of in process where by looking at the history of public health in San Francisco and looking at the health problems, like the various epidemics, everything from, as we said, the discrimination and racism that happened with the Chinese in the 19th century to the bubonic plague, to then the cholera that happened even before then. And then, of course, the flu epidemic in 1918-19. And then in the 40s, there was the polio epidemic in San Francisco. Well, not in San Francisco, but throughout the country and the world. And then we have really HIV/AIDS. And now we have COVID-19. So when we look at those epidemics, and we will look at those in pandemics, or some of them were pandemics, certainly the flu pandemic and now COVID-19 pandemic. When we really look at those, then we look at how were people treated during these epidemics in terms of, were they able to access proper medical care? How were they treated by public health and by clinical health professionals? What does this say about the way social disparities are present in the way in which people are treated? And again, this has come up with COVID-19. We've heard on the news, we've read in the newspapers how, in fact, particularly the Black community is enormously concerned, because as we look at the numbers, we see that Black folks are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19 in terms of not only morbidity, but mortality as well, by the deaths. Anyway, I don't want to go on, but San Francisco has a very interesting history with regard to public health, and has actually gone through these various epidemics and pandemics, and has come through them fairly well, but not unscarred, as I've tried to indicate. So I want to kind of stop there and ask if there are any questions or comments about any of this. Let me see what I can do here in terms of giving you, unsharing my screen. Oh, well, let's see. I better not play around too much. But are there any questions? Any points of confusion? Did you all hear what I had to say? For better or worse?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So,
Yes.
like, in terms of, let's say, like, in terms of, like, what they had the citizens to do for all these different diseases and stuff that popped up in, like, California, like, had it ever gone to the extent that we're at right now? Or
Yes.
has it been, yeah?
Yeah, what I would say is that, and this has been made in the news now, and I can tell you this. As a matter of fact, I'm actually teaching a course on this fall on the history of public health. I developed a course years ago at San Francisco State. And even before I knew COVID-19 was coming, I was slated to teach the class. And I answered that, Marianne, I think you asked the question, that the 1918 flu pandemic, in terms of how it's being framed, is very much similar to what we're seeing now with COVID-19, right? In terms of, quarantining, in terms of mask wearing, in terms of a public health response, you can actually compare the two. Of course, they're different, but in terms of the public health measures, we absolutely can see that they are very similar. If that's the question, if I got your question correctly. In terms of a parallel, there are a lot of parallels between the 1918-19 flu pandemic and this COVID-19.
So I have something to add. Maybe it may help clarify, because there is a difference between what a pandemic is and an epidemic.
That's right.
So what we have currently going on right now is a pandemic, which is
Yes.
worldwide.
Yes.
Epidemics are mostly localized to either a certain area, whether it be a city, county, or state, or even a country.
Yes.
So the seriousness of this COVID-19 is something to which every single one of us should take very, seriously in terms of the precautions we have to take in going about our daily lives under these conditions. Because currently it has many of the experts extremely worried because there is no known vaccine available.
Mhm.
And in terms of the treatments available to help people who are either suffering from the related illnesses or difficult or the related ailments that come with having the COVID-19 virus is why they are very worried, because it's something to where if somebody develops those more serious conditions, it's something to where there are very few treatments and medications available to help them recover from the virus and its related complications.
Yes.
So hopefully that will help Paula better explain your question. Hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. And that's why, Brian, I actually, one of the reasons why I said in response to Marianne's question that they are,
or Marianne, yeah.
Marianne is the fact that that both of these, both the 1918 flu pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic, they're also both pandemics. They were suffered worldwide. Yeah. And everything that Brian said, I totally endorse, and that's absolutely right. We can't be too careful. It's a very, it's without hyping this up. It's a very scary time in many ways. I am hopeful, however, I'm hoping that there's some kind of therapies that will become available, hopefully soon, medications, etc. We can't look forward to a vaccine for another year to 18 months, from what I gather.
Yes. So that is the typical normal time frame.
Yeah. So thank you, Brian, for your comments, and thank you, Marianne, for your question. Are there any other questions? Anything that was unclear?
That would be broadly available to be effective for the population. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that 18 months time frame, doctor, is the usual given amount of time for them to develop a vaccine that's effective for most of the general population.
Yeah. Yes. And so, let's hope they're going to come up with something pretty soon, even maybe medications that might be helpful, at least to cut the symptomology down a little bit so it isn't so deadly to some people. So,
yes.
Fingers are crossed. I think that will come first.
Yes, that is definitely on the road to definite urgency for many of the medical professionals and fields. So that's where they're likely looking at this moment, because many of them know that that vaccine is still many months way off in the future at this moment.
Yeah. So, well, fingers are crossed that they're going to come up with some therapies for this. Okay. Are there any other questions related to the presentation? Anything at all? It was pretty clear. Good.
Pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
Yes, it was pretty straightforward and wonderfully covered a lot of areas.
Thank you. I try. Okay, so let's talk about. Let me kind of tell you all. There are 26 of you on the. Actually, there are 30 now on the chat. This is good. Wow, full enrollment. So I want to tell you again. I know I'm repeating myself, but during these times, repeating is not necessarily a bad thing. Is that you will notice on the Canvas that there is an assignment that is due on Saturday. You'll be reading 2 very brief articles on the bubonic plague of roughly 1900 to 1909 in San Francisco. And I've got 3 questions or so you'll be kind of answering. It's very straightforward, 350 words, not a big deal. You'll submit that via Canvas. It's worth 5 points. So that's, I'm going to ask that you all do that. I want to see 100% participation. I want to see 30 assignments in that box by Saturday night. All right. So that's one thing. And so please do that. And that'll kind of help us shore up the time between, so to make sure the classes tonight is robust, that you're not being, that it's a way of embellishing this class period, because doing 2.5 or 3 hours on Zoom is enough to almost kill anyone. So we don't want to do that. So that's why I'm coming up with these kind of different assignments. So go ahead and do that. I think the next thing up at bat, and something that's got me a little anxious, but I just want you all to work with me on this, is Nestor indicated at the very beginning of the class period that there is a way of making sure that I can share the screen or have you all. So in other words, that I can make it so any of you could share your screens. And that way, you can actually do your group projects. Is that right, Nestor, to your understanding? Yeah, that would be good. In a minute, we can do that. That actually would be quite good. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and I know I'm repeating myself again, would those of you captains or one of you from each group write to me? I want a couple things: the title of your group project, who's in your group project, names, first and last, and also roughly just 2 or 3 lines about how it's going. Next week, we're not going to hold class as we've held it, but we're going to use that time for those of you writing term papers to really get those worked on. And for those of you who are doing group projects, you're to work with your groups in a creative way, remotely, in order to really kind of shore up and finish up your group projects. And then my job, once I collect all of your information, I will then have an accounting of who's doing what and what I can expect. And then I'll be able to assign dates in terms of who will go when, in terms of the group presentations. And then also we will talk about ways that I also think it's fair, and I wanted to be fair to the people doing their term paper, to have at least a little bit of time to share with us what they did their term paper on and their findings. I think that would be very interesting, and I would like to keep that promise. So I hope that that's super clear. What I need from you in the next couple of days in terms of what's going on with your group projects or papers. If you've already emailed me those things, I'm asking that you resend those emails, and I'm going to be looking out like a hawk from now until Friday, because I really do need those by Friday because I need to plan. And I will do that. And then I will also send you an email and let you know further, reminding you that next week's class is a class in which you will be working on either your group projects or your term paper. And also I will lay out for you what group is going when and the time frames. So we plan this in a very good way. Let me remind you that there will be a second quiz. And the second quiz, we will go over all of that during the week before the quiz. But I want to share with you that, as I said to you before, that the plan is for the second quiz to include information from the term papers and the group projects. So I need full and utter participation and cooperation in the weeks moving forward. I really do. We really need to finish off this class really, really well. For those of you who came in a little later, what I've decided to do is to make the class worth 100 points. I'm divvying the points up to be 100 points. I will make sure that given the stress that we've all been under, I want to make sure that no one is unfairly graded at all in this process. So I plan on my grading being a little more liberal than I typically would, just to make sure that no one gets hurt in this process, because this has been quite a ride, So anyway, I'll be quiet now, and I hope all of that is super clear. Okay, Nestor, you've been very kind, and I want to thank you publicly for the help that you've given. You've offered me some technical support, and you've also been great about recording these. Thank you very much for what you've done. I really appreciate your help. It takes a village, that is for damn sure. With that said, and just you all give me a couple more minutes, Nestor, did you want to see if this works in terms of sharing the screen? So the object would be for me to be able to, I guess, share the screen with anyone who wants to, like, for example, if Brian had a PowerPoint, or Nestor, if you had a PowerPoint, or Marianne, that you would be able to show us that PowerPoint. So how do I do that? Oh dear. Oh, I see. So I have, what I just did is that I clicked on shared screen with the upward arrow, and it says share, but I don't see a place where I could share it with everybody. There's advanced sharing options. Would that be it? Okay, so here's what it says. How many participants can share at the same time? Multiple. That's the right answer. So who can share? I'll put all participants. There it is. I put one participant one participant can share at a time, which makes sense, but who can share all participants? So now if I get out of this, do you have something you could share with us? Okay. Yeah, it says Nestor has oh, there it look there. Oh my God, it worked. Yeah, I can see you moving the hand around. Yes, and I can see you. You're now under file. There it is. Yeah, we can see.
Yep, I can see.
Present. There it is. Okay. Wow. Okay. Excellent. Guess what? We just did it. So thank you. That's very nice. I so appreciate it. I'm so technologically behind the times, but I hope that's part of my delight. Anyway, but maybe not. This is great. Good news. And so I would not know how to do that, but go ahead and test it.
What was that?
Yeah, you can hear it. I have to watch movies all the time in my other class.
I can see it as well.
Okay, well, I think we're good. So this is working out. Thank goodness. So, okay, please promise to be in touch with me in the next 48 hours. Term papers and group projects. Let me know who's involved. I'm going to do a check off. I would just want to make sure everyone's accounted for and that we are in good shape. And then please go to your Canvas and you'll see 2 very brief articles. I think it'll be kind of fun to write about. It's on the bubonic plague in San Francisco. I think you'll enjoy the project. It's a little tiny writing assignment. Okay.
Got it.
It's good to see you, however virtual.
Likewise.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, and remember, it's great seeing you. I miss you all. I really think that this is just totally Plan B. Plan A would be for us to be at Skyline College. So I'm so sorry we
Agree.
together. I would love to be with you in person. So please know that I am totally at your disposal next Wednesday night. Really, I'm on duty. My job is to help out. So as you're working on your stuff, whether it's your term paper or your group project, I will be checking my emails every 5 minutes next Wednesday night, and I'll put this in writing to all of you. I will call you as I have last time. Last time, 4 or 5 groups or 4 or 5 individuals hit me up, and I called them, and we had a good conversation. So I hope that'll be the same case or similar next Wednesday night. Okay. So it is now 7:43. Have a really good evening. Thank you for everything. And thank you all for being here and hanging in here with me on this whole thing.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The world stops and regularly.